Back now to the talk about Ukraine we've been looking at. President Trump today calling on Ukraine and Russia to take a ceasefire deal. This after Russia launched a deadly attack, deadliest we've seen on Ukraine in months. Looking at the scene in Kyiv right now, the capital of Ukraine, after a barrage of missiles and drones struck overnight, killing at least a dozen people, injuring more than 90. Truth Social post from President Trump where he said, "I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. Not necessary, very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get this peace deal done." Now, the peace talks were front and center again today at the Trump meeting in Washington with the Prime Minister of Norway, where they did take some questions from reporters, and President Trump was asked about his message to Vladimir Putin after that attack. And here's what he said.
I didn't like last night. I wasn't happy with it. And we're in the midst of talking peace, and missiles were fired. And I was not happy with it.
Let's bring John Herbst in on this, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He's now senior director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador Herbst, welcome. Pick up on that point. This, hey, Vladimir, stop. But, you know, will you listen to Trump, and what do you make of their relationship?
Look, Putin has a very clear objective, which is to take effective political control. And the Trump administration said, as they took office, that it wanted to achieve a durable peace, laying out the general terms for that, requiring compromise on both sides. The Russians have rejected those terms. When Trump proposed a ceasefire, a general ceasefire in the middle of March, the Ukrainians said yes, the Russians said no.
Right.
When they proposed then a ceasefire on the Black Sea, the Ukrainians said yes, the Russians said no. So clearly Putin is the obstacle to peace, and President Trump does not seem to acknowledge that.
Right. He did the stop Vladimir, but you're right in the other comments that we've heard from him. I'm curious of what you think, because I've heard so many different things over the last 2 days about this back and forth over Crimea, going back to 2014 and what should happen next. It certainly sounds as if President Trump thinks that Crimea ends up in Russian hands. Obviously, Ukraine sees it differently. Here's what Trump said about it.
Please.
That had nothing to do with me, Crimea. That was 11 years ago with Obama. And they made a decision. There wasn't a bullet fired. There was no fighting. There was no anything. They just handed it over. Now they say, well, can you get it back? I think that's going to be a very difficult thing to do.
What do you say, Ambassador?
What I am stunned by the events of the past several days is how Trump's policy seems to be following the lead of Obama. What President Trump did not mention there was that Obama's Secretary of State was urging the Ukrainians not to fight for Crimea. So the Americans were one of the reasons why Ukraine did not put up a fight in 2014.
Right.
And now Trump seems to be ready to trash 85 years of sound American policy, a policy of not recognizing the conquest of others to make territorial gains. We refused to accept the Soviet seizure of the Baltic states in 1940. And that policy was vindicated when the Baltic states became independent, when the Soviet Union fell apart. Trump, in fact, strengthened that policy in his first term when they issued the Pompeo Declaration that we would never recognize Russia taking Crimea. And of course, Russia has control of Crimea. It's one thing to acknowledge they have control. It's something else to endorse that control by giving it political legitimacy. So just as Obama was weak on Crimea, Trump is weak on Crimea. As Obama fatuously looked for a reset with Russia, which failed,
right,
Trump is talking about a reset with Russia.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.